In his first interview in 2 years with Game Daily, EA CEO Andrew Wilson gives us some insight into how the company thinks about the industry and their strategy for making games. Insights such as how he indicates that player expectations is why Anthem failed. He explains how we only play games for the social interaction, and he implies that we should give EA credit for not giving up on Battlefront 2 and Anthem. Here to chew the fat with me, Gareth Evans, is Mr. Henry Cooper.
There's a lot of fat to chew.
We brought together these two groups of players who were making this emotional value calculation on two different vectors. One was traditional BioWare story-driven content, and the other was this action-adventure type content. About the 30 or 40 hour mark, they really had to come together and start working in on the Elder game. At that point, everyone kind of went, oh, hang on a minute, now the calculation is off. It's off because I've got a friend who sits in this other category of player. They want to play the game in a certain way. I want to play the game in a certain way. The promise was we can play together, and that's not working very well. This is him specifically talking here about what's wrong with Anthem. It doesn't mention anything about the issues and the problems with the launch, with the loot, with the bugs, with the load times, nothing about that, right? In this whole interview, right? What he goes on about is what people were expecting from the game.
No one knew what to expect from the game. It's not like people had certain expectations. No one had any, because the marketing was so weird. And it's been talked about before how they only solidified the actual idea of what the game was going to be themselves 18 months before launch. How are we supposed to expect anything when you don't even know?
He's outlining two specific types of gamer here. One who wants to play the RPG type, like the traditional BioWare story-driven content, as he says, and the other was the action-adventure type content player. And this is his honest summation of what went wrong, right? As they're playing together, when they play the end game, because I've got a friend who sits in the other category. The players I'm playing with are in a different category to me, therefore this game is shit. That's what he's saying. Yeah. How does that compute in his little tiny brain? I just don't get what he's trying to say here. All he's doing is analysing what types of player play the game for whatever reasons, and then he's using that as a reason why the game sucks, and that's not right.
Just ignoring all of the fundamental issues there with all the glitches and load time issues and loot being unbalanced or getting too much or too little and all that. But no, it's just because this guy wants to play an RPG and this guy wants to play a loot shooter. We can't get on. I'll tell you what, if I want to play an RPG, I'll go and play an RPG. If I want to play a loot shooter, I'll go play a loot shooter. And I think that's what people are doing, because Anthem's not fulfilling any of those needs because it's trying to do a bit of everything.
The quote goes on, oh, by the way, he's obviously paraphrasing what a gamer might think. Oh, by the way, I'm used to 100 hours of BioWare story, and that's not what I got. Or I expected that this game would have meaningfully advanced the action component that we'd seen in games like Destiny before, and I don't feel like it has. He's putting words in players' mouths here, right? Yeah. He's talking about their expectations for the game and how if their expectations are off, then that's why they didn't like the game. It was nothing to do with how shit it was, nothing to do with how the loot drops, nothing to do with the load times, nothing to do with the empty Fort Tarsis. It's nothing to do with all that plus more of the issues. It's all to do with player expectations. Isn't setting players' expectations part of your job?
Yeah, that's how you market a game. You set expectations and ideally you exceed them. You don't leave people wondering, what the hell am I buying? And then when people have bought it, they're like, what the hell have I bought?
It's part of the problem with Anthem was that they did try and fuse these two genres of games with this traditionally RPG game developer. And for what reason? Like, why did they do that? Well, we've got some insight, right? So talking specifically about BioWare's evolution as a studio and the games that they make, he says, there are kids today who are 12 years old who weren't around when BioWare started making games. They have different expectations of what BioWare game should be in the context of the world they've grown up in. They have different, what expectations do they have of a BioWare game at that age?
Yeah, if they weren't around for when BioWare started making games, they're probably not going to have played many, so why would they have an expectation of what BioWare do?
Okay, we can assume what he means here is that they expect games to be like Destiny, to be like Fortnite, because if 12-year-olds are playing them,
because they're what's cool.
That's what games should be around the concept they've grown up in. So basically, what he's saying is that BioWare have to make a game that's like these successful games, because that's what 12-year-old game is like. That's what I'm getting out of this, right? And he carries on. As a result of that, BioWare has to evolve and has to expand and has to test the elasticity of that brand, which is pretty much what I kind of said there. So this is what BioWare are doing now. They're evolving due to the fact that so many 12-year-olds are playing games like Fortnite and Destiny or whatever. So that's why they decided to mash up the tradition, what worked for BioWare, which is the traditional RPG single-player experience, with this online game as a service bullshit that not very many people like, apart from obviously the 12-year-olds who play Fortnite Right? So that's why BioWare have evolved.
The thing is, Anthem in the European ratings board, PEGI, it's rated 16. It's not for 12-year-olds. 12-year-olds, in theory, shouldn't be playing it. No doubt they are, because parents can buy it for them and everything. And he realistically won't care, because if 12-year-olds are getting their parents to buy it, that's still more money. But why are you talking about 12-year-olds? You've made a game that's not for 12-year-olds. It's for, teenagers, proper teenagers. So 12-year-olds shouldn't be on your mind.
Yeah, on the one note, he's saying that players' expectations were wrong, because he's saying a fundamental part of the problem of the game was that there's two types of players playing this game: the classical RPG type of player and these young 12-year-olds who are playing the game as a service type of game. Both of those types of players can't mesh properly playing this game. That's why the game failed, right? But he's also admitting that this is the reason why they decided themselves that this is what kind of game they're going to make, based on the fact that loads of 12-year-olds play these types of games. It's like it's admission of guilt then, isn't it? Because they've decided to chase this trend of games as a service, and then he's also admitted that it doesn't work as a fusion between the old and the new. So either pick one or the other.
Yeah, pick one or the other. And the correct one to go for is the one that BioWare are good at and have experience with. Most people are, if you see the name BioWare and you're buying a game because it's a BioWare game, you're going to pick it because they've done stuff you like in the past. And what they've done in the past is thick, content-heavy RPGs with lots of story, lots of decisions, all important traditional RPG mechanics. None of this loot shooter stuff. That's fine if you like loot shooters. It's absolutely fine. It's a valid genre. But BioWare don't really do that. So why did you get them to do that? Why did they do that? So then Andrew Wilson carries on talking about the future of Anthem. He says that if he believed the world, characters, javelin suits, traversing the world, and participating in the world wasn't compelling, then provided we hadn't made promises to our players, we might not invest further. IP lives for generations and runs in these 7 to 10 year cycles. So if I think about Anthem on a 7 to 10 year cycle, it may not have had the start many of us wanted, including our players. I feel like the team is really going to get there with something special and something great, because they've demonstrated that they can.
Obviously they can, right? I mean, given enough time, people can fix all the mistakes. Let's look at No Man's Sky as a great example for that. A launch disaster that game had, and it's fixed up to a point now where everybody who's still playing the game is really, really happy. Like, anybody can fix this shit given enough time. That 7 to 10 year cycle, that's how long it's going to take. Probably won't take that long, but 4 years, I mean, how long do these players have to wait to get a decent game? That's the first question.
And he's trying to justify releasing it as it is. If I'm going to take your 7 to 10 year premise for a live game service IP life cycle thing, okay, that's fine. But why did it release now? Because if you can keep that 7 to 10 year service, just do that in a few years' time when the game is finished, and then carry on with your 10 year service plan once the game is ready and performing well. Not just, we need to get into that 10 year cycle as soon as possible. No, that 10 year cycle is not really going anywhere.
And the other bit he says here about if the world wasn't compelling, the characters, the javelin suits traversing the world and participating in the world wasn't compelling, then they just ditch it, right? We might not invest further. You want a pat on the back for that?
Yeah, we didn't give up, aren't we such heroes?
Yeah, what about other things like a decent story? I mean, the story isn't compelling. How's about that? Yeah, what about the story? What about the narrative? What about the actual gameplay? I mean, there's many facets that he hasn't touched on here. Why not build those bits up rather than just focusing on those things which are very limited appeal? The next thing that he talked about was Star Wars Battlefront 2, and he says, it had some issues with progression system. I'd like to believe that lesser company would have just tossed it and moved on. Like well done, guys, for being, firstly, is there any lesser company than EA?
We hold ourselves to such a high standard
we're
that
such
we're
a
not
great company. We fixed the game, and now it's not shit. Like, it launched shit, and because we're a great company, we fixed it for you. You want a pat on the back for that?
We
you
eventually
want some credit
did
for
our
fixing
job.
A shit game. And it's the same with Anthem. He wants credit for fixing that shit game too. He carries on. I think everything we do, we get a bit wrong. In a world where you give absolutely everything you have and typically get something a bit wrong, a lesser organization that didn't have this core value system, this is paraphrasing now, the creativity and passion and pioneering which he's talking about, would get really down on themselves really quickly. So he wants a pat on the back because any lesser organization that didn't have their core value system. Come on, Andrew. I mean, I know part of your job is selling your company, but nobody believes this shit. There's not many companies in the industry that I would put below you as far as EA. EA at the bottom of the barrel. Like, if you don't get any lesser than EA. What I mean, you release shit games and then you fix them up later. You want credit for that because any lesser company. There's no lesser company. A lot of people do games right the first time.
Yeah, they get it right in the first place and don't have to fix it later. They continually make it better than it already was.
Imagine releasing the game on day one and it being feature complete and ready and no bugs and shit like that. It's a crazy idea to think of, Andrew, but how's about thinking about that in future? And then the last point of conversation was games as a service, and he talked a lot about this and talking about why do we play games, what motivates us as gamers, as well as why they're pushing towards games as a service. The reason is because of social interaction as the core of why people play. Well, of course it is. Social interaction.
Yeah, your video games are now a social media. It's the new Facebook. You can chat with your friends while you're killing aliens.
So let's get into these quotes. The way we built games 20 years ago actually doesn't fulfill what has become a very core motivation of why people play today. At the very core, we want social interaction, and we see how digital media is a prime source for our social interaction today. At the very core, we can go to Facebook for that, dude. I mean, we can go to the park with our mates and get social interaction. We don't have to do it in a game.
Yeah, not exclusively in a game, that's for sure.
The games as a service concept is likely to be foundational to our future because it fulfills the very core motivation of how we interact as human beings. Again, talking about core motivations, right? This doesn't mean that has to be the case for every game, and it also doesn't mean that games that don't employ that at its very core can't be part of that broader network value that I as a player have. I actually think that games like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order will have 30, 40, 50 million play that kind of game in the context of subscription, whereas maybe only 10 or 12 million might play it absent of a subscription. Players will always orient towards the big network live services because that's where all their friends are. If you're making a purchase decision that involves a $60 price point as a friction point, you're likely always going to choose the ones that will fulfill your core motivation, which is social interaction. So
stop assuming that the reason I do everything is for social interaction. But I game predominantly single player. I very rarely play multiplayer. I do it every now and then, I'm not going to lie, but not often. But I like to game for myself because I enjoy a story, good gameplay, all that. I don't need anyone else to be there. I don't want anyone else there.
I would go as far to say social interaction is my very last motivation to play a game.
Yeah, I do it to avoid people.
Exactly. Avoiding people is part of why I play games.
Oh, well, a lovely sunny day in late June. I'm going to stay inside, play games by myself. That's what I want to do.
My motivation to play games comes from compelling gameplay a lot of the time. The gameplay is compelling. It compels me to keep playing, right? There's my motivation, as well as sometimes a narrative, a compelling narrative, a story that I want to see finished. What he's talking about here is the 12-year-old kids again, those who can't afford the $60 friction point in brackets that he's talking about here. What he wants to do is get all these like 50 million people playing Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order on their subscription service because only 10 or 12 million people would buy them at $60 price tag. I mean, isn't that enough for you? Why must you force this agenda of games as a service on all your games? Why must we subscribe to that services just because it's an ongoing, because they get more opportunity to take microtransactions over? What this tells me is that there's a very high chance that Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order will have some sort of additional monetization, right? Have they not come out and said that there's no microtransactions though?
Yeah, it's a weird one. Yeah, I wonder if we'll get a Randy Pitchford amendment to the definition of what a microtransaction is. But I think it's weird that he's even bringing up the subscription concept there, because EA are very keen on their EA Origin and EA Access subscription things on PC and Xbox, but they don't really, to my knowledge, have a massive social component. It's just that you pay a fee, you access the games, and then the games might have a social component. I don't really get why he's bringing that in. I mean, I know he's really keen on it and pushing it, but your arguments about, social interaction, it's just a plug more than anything.
The problem with all this is that the way that they're making games now is focused towards these games as a service, these games that they can take money off people, with microtransactions and additional things like that after the fact. And to try and justify all that, he's telling us what our motivation to play is. He doesn't for once entertain the idea that maybe not all gamers have the primary motivation of it being a social interaction. It's that concept that's clouding his. I don't know if it's, again, it's what I always say about Andrew Wilson. It's either bullshit that he's using to justify his decisions, or he's completely naive and he's just stupid, and he actually thinks that.
Yeah, surely you can't be that arrogant to assume, I know what everyone plays. I know how everyone does it in this industry. You can't be. I don't think he's a stupid man. I think he's a massive bullshitter.
Chasing trends, and he's just trying to justify it with all this bullshit. So it's our fault Anthem failed. We only only play games for social interaction, and apparently they deserve credit for fixing up Battlefront 2 and Anthem, because, you know, it was shit to start with and they deserve all the credit. There you have it. There's our insight into the first interview with Andrew Wilson in over 2 years with Game Daily recently. So what did you think about it? Let us know down in the comments below. Like the video and hit the bell, and or subscribe if you want to follow our content.
Just on a side note, there was the story about loot boxes being Kinder Surprises that came out yesterday, but we covered that in our podcast this week, which is available right now over on Patreon if you are a Patreon member at patreon.com/prettygoodgaming.
For those of you who aren't Patreon members, the podcast will be released on Sunday, so look out for that one. And from Henry and I, we will see you again in the next video.